Well, good morning. It is a happy Wednesday to everybody. I'm very excited to share today's webinar with you. The content I think is great. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So today we're going to be talking about identifying your leader language. And really it's more about your leadership style, but we're going to be going through a little assessment to do some self-discovery of what kind of leader are you. Um, how would you define leadership? So do me a favor, get a pen and paper ready. You're going to need that throughout today's webinar, just to take a few notes. You're not going to have to take a test or anything at the end. But I have a question for you. How would you finish this sentence? A good leader should always dot dot dot. What are some things? Go ahead and write down some ideas that you would finish that sentence with. A good leader should always. Go ahead and write those down, and we're going to keep moving forward as you continue to write. So as you're writing, and before we get to assessing the answers that you're putting down, I'm going to share the definition from James McGregor Burns, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, leadership expert, historian, presidential biographer, and political scientist. According to his principles of transformational leadership, which can also be known as an inspirational leader, an effective leader is someone who does the following, at least the following: creates an inspiring vision of the future. Um, a leader motivates and inspires people to engage with that vision that they've set for the future. A good leader manages the delivery of the vision. A good leader coaches and builds a team so that it's more effective at achieving that vision. So, a good leader not only sets the vision, but helps the people get to and accomplish that vision. So, hopefully, you're finishing up some ideas of what a good leader should always do. And we're going to go into a few more, quite a few more ideas and statements that you either agree or disagree with. So remember, leadership is a fluid practice. Anyone who strives to be a leader should always be changing and improving based on the information they learn and what their followers need at any given time. The longer you are in the role of a leader or act as a leader, the more likely it is that you'll change the way you choose to complete the sentence that we talked about before. A good leader should always, so in any given time or um, part of your journey as a leader, those words that you finish that sentence with could change pretty drastically from time to time too. So in order to grow as a leader, you first need to know where you stand as one. So let's go ahead and break down what your answers were from today for that statement. A good leader should always, and then whatever you wrote down. We're going to take a little test here. And as we dive into, it's just a short survey, and it was developed by a man named Bill Torbert in cooperation with psychologist Susan Cook-Gruder. It's known as the Leadership Development Profile, and it will help determine which leadership style you uphold based on the action logics or statements you most agree with. Grab your pen and paper, which should be in front of you already. When you read a statement or you hear a statement that you agree with, write it down on your notes. And so each statement will have its own identifier. So it might be like an S1, an O2, or an A3. At the end, we'll determine what your answers say about you as a leader. Now, I want you to remember that the categories that the statements are in or the action logics are in don't necessarily relate to the final outcome of your leadership style. So as we go through the testing aspect and the statements, they're categorized, but those categories don't necessarily line up completely with what style you are. So if you agree with it, write it down. If you don't agree with it, just let it be. You don't have to rank them or rate them or anything. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's go to the first category. The first category is known as an individualist. Little description: an individualist leader is self-aware, creative, and primarily focused on their own actions as opposed to overall organizational performance. They are exceptionally driven by the desire to exceed personal goals and constantly improve upon their skills. So here are a few statements that if you are an individualist, you would agree with. So if you agree with any of these, just write down the indicator. So do you agree with any of the following? I1. A good leader should always put trust in their own intuition over established organizational processes. Again, if you agree with it, just write it down in your notes. If you don't agree with it, don't even worry about it. The next one, I2, it's important to be able to relate to others so I can easily communicate complex ideas to them. And the third individualist comment, I'm more comfortable with progress than sustained success. Again, if you agree with it, just write it down. If you don't worry about it. And again, we aren't going to have to rank these or anything like that. It's just whether you agree or not. The next category would be the strategist. Strategists are extremely aware of the environment in which they operate. They make it a point to gather a deep understanding of the structures and processes that make their business tick, but they're also able to keep perspective, apply critical thinking, and evaluate what could be improved. Do you agree with any of these strategist action logics or statements? S1 says a good leader should always be able to build a consensus in divided groups. S2 says it's important to help develop an organization as a whole in addition to the growth of individuals. And S3 says conflict is inevitable, but I know enough about my team's personal and professional relationships to handle that friction. So write down if you agree with any of these strategist action logics. Next, we're going to go to the alchemist. The alchemist is distinguished from other action logics in that they're unique. They have a unique ability to see the big picture in everything, while also understanding the need to take details seriously. Under this type of leadership, no department or employee is overlooked. Do you agree with any of the alchemist statements or action logics? A1 says a good leader helps their employees reach their highest potential and possesses the necessary empathy and moral awareness to get there. A2, it's important to make a profound and positive impact on whatever I'm working on. And A3, I have a unique ability to balance short-term needs and long-term goals. If this is you and you agree with this, go ahead and write one of these down. Let's look at the opportunist. Opportunists are guided by a certain natural level of mistrust in others and rely on appearance of control to keep their employees in line. Opportunists usually believe in the adage of an eye for an eye. Do you adhere to or agree with any of the opportunist statements? O1 says a good leader should always view others as a potential competition to be bested, even if it's at the expense of their professional development. And O2 says, I reserve the right to reject the input of those who question or criticize my ideas. Do you agree with either one of those statements? The next category we're going to talk about as we go through this profile is the diplomat. The diplomat is not concerned with assuming control. Instead, they seek to cause minimal impact by conforming to existing norms and completing their daily tasks with as little friction as possible. Do you agree with or align with any of the following diplomat statements? D1, a good leader should always resist change since it risks causing instability. D2, it's important to provide the social glue in team situations safely away from conflict. Or D3, I tend to thrive in more team-oriented or supporting leadership roles. Go ahead and write those down. And then the last category we have is going to be the expert. Now, the expert is always at the front line of their field and continuously strives to perfect their knowledge and meet their own high expectations. The expert is fantastic as a contributor and source of knowledge, but can usually stand to improve on their field of emotional intelligence. So, in this last category, do you agree with any of these expert statements? A good leader should prioritize their own pursuit of knowledge over the needs of the organization and their direct reports. Or E2, when problem solving with others in the company, my opinion tends to be the correct one. So, as you've written down the ones that you agree with, which leader, which style do you fall into? There's going to be different ones here. And so, the more statements that you agree with, the more likely you practice a mix of leadership styles. And that's okay. So, we're going to go, I'm going to show you a quick breakdown in just a second. So, for instance, as you go through this, if you agree with everything the strategist said, which would be S1, S2, and S3, this could make you 66% strategic leader and 33% democratic leader. All right. So there can be a definite mix. So let's take a look at these. Democratic leader would have written down S3. Autocratic would have been any of the following: O1, O2, E1, or E2. A laissez-faire leadership style would have been D2, D3, or E1. Strategic, S1 or S2, or A3. Transformational leader could have written down I1, I2, A1, or A2. And a transactional leader would have been D3. A bureaucratic leader would have been D1, right? So again, you could have a mix of them. You could agree with all of one particular style, which would make you just stronger in that particular area. So let's take a look at what does this mean as far as like definitions of these leaders. So you've agreed with certain statements or action logics. Let's see what that says about you as your leadership style. The democratic leadership, this would be someone who agreed with S3. So for those who fell into the category of democratic leadership, you'll be happy to hear that this style is commonly very effective. These types of leaders make decisions based on the input of each team member, and although the leader makes the final call, each employee has an equal say on a project's direction. Democratic leadership is one of the most effective styles because it allows lower level employees to exercise authority, which gives them more skin in the game and generally makes them more loyal to the company as a whole. Solving an issue under democratic leadership resembles how decisions can be made in company board meetings. A leader gives the team a few decision-related options. An open discussion is held about each, and either the leader makes a decision based on input, or the decision could be put to a vote. Does this sound like you? So that's the democratic leadership style. The next one would be the autocratic leadership style, which would have agreed with O1, O2, E1, or E2. Now, this is the opposite of democratic leadership and is rarely effective in the long term. In this leadership style, employees are neither considered nor consulted prior to a direction and are expected to adhere to the decision at a time and place stipulated by the leader. An example of this might be when a manager changes hours of work shifts for multiple employees without consulting anybody, just changes their shifts. In today's workplace culture, this type of leadership can't be sustained without losing employees. If you happen to fall under this leadership category, you need to work on being more open to the intellect and perspective of the rest of your team. Because just as a reminder, you don't have to do this alone. So that's what an autocratic leader might believe. So we've talked about democratic, autocratic. Now let's talk about the laissez-faire leadership style. If you fall into this, you might have agreed with D2, D3, or E1 on your list of notes. This French term literally means let them do and can refer to leaders who hand over nearly all authority to their employees. In a young startup, you might see a laissez-faire company founder who makes no major office policies around work hours or deadlines and puts full trust into the employees while they focus on the big pieces of running the company. While this leadership style can be empowering for employees, it can also limit their development and overlook critical company growth opportunities. So it really depends on the situation as to how effective this leadership could be, and the people, obviously. All right, so next we have the strategic leadership style. If you fall into the strategic leadership style, you would have agreed with S1, S2, and A3. Strategic leaders sit at the intersection between a company's main operations and its growth opportunities. This type of leader promotes a culture of inquiry, but also accepts additional burdens in the interest of ensuring consistency and stability for for everyone else, for the entire team. Strategic leaders are constantly vigilant, honing their ability to anticipate by scanning the environment for signals of change. They also have a tendency to want to study failures, both their own and that of the team, as a constructive way to find the hidden lessons. So they're constantly looking to grow even through the mishaps, if you will. So that's the strategic leadership style. The next one is transformational leadership. Transformational leadership styles would have agreed with I1, I2, A1, and A2. Transformational leaders are always working on to improve upon the status quo and push their team to grow and reach outside of their comfort zone. This type of leadership style, this type of leadership is greatly desired among growth-minded companies because it motivates employees to see what they're capable of. One potential downfall is that transformational leaders can risk losing sight of everyone's individual learning curve, especially if the correct type of coaching and direction isn't provided for the individuals. So, something to be aware of if you fall under the transformational leadership style. Close to the transformational leadership style, or the next one I should say, is transactional leadership, which would be D3. Perhaps one of the most common types of leaders. Transactional leaders or managers reward their employees for precisely the work they're expected to do. These types of leaders lean on things like scheduled bonuses and staying with the status quo. Transactional leadership helps establish roles and responsibilities for each employee, but can also encourage employees to stick to doing just the bare minimum. Finally, we have the bureaucratic leadership style, which would have agreed with D1 in your notes. Other phrases that can help describe this type of leader include traditional or old school. These types of leaders go by the books. They might listen and consider the input of employees, but they tend to reject ideas if they can conflict with company policy of past practices. Employees under this leadership style might not feel as controlled as they would under autocratic leadership, but there's still a lack of freedom in how much people are able to do within their roles. This type of leadership can lead to discouragement and a lack of innovation, something that a lot of ambitious, growth-oriented or growth-minded companies definitely want to avoid. So, are you surprised by your leadership style based off of the action logics that you agreed with from our earlier test? Does this support the answers that you had for what a good leader should always do? Let's see how we can kind of take this to a next level and build upon whatever leadership style you have. Regardless of what type of leadership style or styles, the combination you fall into, we know that there are aspects that you should always be trying to improve, and perhaps the most important one is communication. As a leader, you need to be able to clearly and succinctly explain goals, tasks, and everything in between to your employees. This means mastering all forms of communication, including one-on-one, departmental, and staff-wide, as well as proper etiquette when it comes to communicating via the phone, email, social media, and even texting. A large part of communicating well involves creating an open and steady flow of communication from your team and creating an environment of trustworthiness and positive feedback when people do choose to come to you with ideas. A few things that everyone can benefit from working on in terms of communication include learning how to read body language of those you're talking with, reducing ambiguity in both written and spoken language, or being as clear as possible, and learning more about active listening and what does it look like to ask questions and follow up when somebody's bringing an idea to you. So, communication is actually one of the things I try to base it's a foundation for any leader that I work with. So, this is something that I very much agree with. So, with your leadership style, how do you keep your team motivated? As a leader, it's your job to inspire your workers to go the extra mile and build their self-esteem along the way. Why is this? Because it'll help them continue to stay loyal to their work and increase their investment in the success of the company. In order to keep your team motivated, show them that you're committed to them by asking for feedback. Also, be open to listening to their concerns about the work, about the department, things like that. Recognize them in front of the rest of the team. understand differences in work styles and personalities, and doing little things like saying thank you for the work that they do, making sure that they know that they're appreciated and valued. Also, as a leader, we need to practice our ability to delegate. It's very common amongst young and novice leaders to believe that delegating tasks is a sign of weakness, and it most definitely is not. By identifying the skills of your employees and assigning duties to them based on those skills, you're being smart, strategic, and resourceful. So use those communication skills to define expectations and explore what each employee might be willing to take on. Be creative in the way that you assign a responsibility and ask for feedback about the best way to take on a task. Just because you've done something one way for some time, that doesn't mean that there isn't a second, a third, or fourth way that someone else could do the task just as well as you, if not better and more effectively. So definitely try to be flexible in that. This trust that you give others to handle larger parts of the business will provide them with a boost of self-esteem and feel more involved. Just be sure that you're encouraging open communication along the way so that no one feels overwhelmed or ill-equipped to complete their tasks. So, uh, learning about yourself, like we've done today, is huge as far as what kind of leader are you. But like this is saying, the more you get to know your team, the more that you can grow exponentially instead of simply adding to what you're capable of because you fear delegating or see it as a sign of weakness. And with that, I just want to thank you for taking time out of this Wednesday to join me through this leadership development profile that we went through together. We've identified 7 styles of leadership. It was democratic, autocratic, laissez-faire, strategic, transformational, transactional, and bureaucratic. Were you surprised with the style that you fell under? Or did you just confirm that, yes, that's the kind of leader that I am? As always, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share this information with you. Like I said, I was very excited to share this one today because I think it's very good to always be doing self-assessments and seeing where we're at any given moment. I hope that you learned something valuable from this particular webinar. I also want to say that I'm proud of you for taking the steps toward becoming a better leader. I know that when we do self-assessments and we're looking to grow, sometimes it can be very uncomfortable because we have to step outside of our comfort zones, and that's where growth happens, right? Um, there's no comfort in growth, as I read recently, but there's no growth in our comfort zone. So I'm glad that you took the time to look a little deeper into yourself and see what kind of leadership style you have. If you have any further questions about what we discussed today, please feel free to email me at Elijah at coachelijah.com, or you can message me here on Facebook on my Rising Tide Facebook page. I'm more than happy to schedule a complimentary consultation with you to help you grow in your leadership style, to help you develop communication skills, and to help you continue your overall growth as a leader. So I want to leave you with this one final thought. Simon Sinek said, a boss has the title, but a leader has the people, right? So utilizing your leadership style, how can you have the people and have the buy-in to help your team, your organization, or your business continue to grow, to continue to move forward and be more productive, as opposed to just having a title, right? Hopefully this particular quote will inspire you to continue your leadership growth. So I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next month.